Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Forum. My name is Kathy Cunningham, and I'm the co-deputy editor and also finance editor for the Commercial Observer. It's truly a pleasure to host today's timely and important discussion. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. This past February, our team hosted our first DEI forum. We had an unbelievable turnout supported by real, candid conversations around the challenges faced by women and minorities in our industry, as well as the business models and corporate policies that are affecting change. But we only scratched the surface of this conversation. We were left with new questions and areas of engagement. And that's precisely why we knew it was a productive event in need of follow-up discussions and an industry-wide call to action. Today's programme will look at the role key industries play in creating greater equity, both within firms and within the larger communities these industries serve. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank some of our key partners for their help in making today's programme possible, starting with our association partner, Crew New York. And our programme sponsors, Burden LLP, CRE United, Farpoint, JP Morgan Chase, Rosenberg and Estes, Turner, and Walker and Dunlop. Before we introduce our opening CEO roundtable, I'd like to take an extra moment to once again thank Crew New York. Crew New York has played an invaluable role on our Commercial Observer DEI Advisory Board and also in planning today's forum. Thank you, Crew New York. I'd like to thank Sherry Best and Nyada Luigi of Crew New York for their critical role in organising today's opening panel. Sherry, Nyada, and the women at Crew are true thought leaders of our industry, and we deeply appreciate your partnership. So we're just about to get started. I'd like to remind everybody we'd like this to be as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions for the speakers, please do submit them via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and the moderators will get to as many questions as possible. We'll also be launching live polls at the end of each session, listing each panel speaker's name. So if you want to connect with them, please let us know. Once again, we'll connect you after the forum. It's now my pleasure to introduce our opening panel, Leadership Taking a Stand, discussing the CEO Action Pledge and what it means for corporate DEI. We have a truly fantastic lineup of panelists, including Dennis Hickey, Global Chief Operating Officer and CEO Americas of Lend-Lease, Tammy Jones, CEO of Basis Investment Group, Mawad Nia, CEO of Matt Cali, George Oliver, CEO of Johnson Controls. Facilitating today's conversation is Carrie Spell Hansen, the founder and CEO of the Folk Institute for Transformative Lending. Carrie partners with executives on transformative learning experiences designed to advance their roles as leaders and to equip them with teachable skills in communication, relationship building, conflict resolution, consensus building, emotional intelligence, active listening, and other empowering capabilities. The Folk Institute helps individuals understand the far-reaching benefits of an environment of multiculturalism, inclusiveness, and equity. It's a great pleasure to welcome this opening roundtable, and I'll now turn it over to Carrie.
Thank you very much, Kathy, for the introduction. Good morning to everyone in the real estate and construction community and all other guests that are attending today. It is truly my pleasure to facilitate this conversation among some of the senior leaders in the industry. The concept for this first panel discussion themed with the CEO Action Pledge was developed by Crew New York's DEI steering team. The CEO Action Pledge for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion is the largest CEO-driven business commitment to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. It was conceived as a response to today's most urgent disparities impacting Black Americans countrywide. CEO Action for Racial Equity's growing issue agenda mobilizes corporate America to confront some of the current barriers that are existing. There are now more than 2,000 CEOs and presidents pledging to act on supporting a more inclusive workplace for employees, communities, and society at large. And we are really pleased to have several of them here on this panel this morning. Before we begin our conversation, I would like to ask each one of the panelists to just do a brief introduction. We'll get more into what you bring to the table shortly. If you'll just take a moment, we'll start with George. Just introduce yourself, please.
I'm George Oliver, Chairman and CEO of Johnson Controls.
Thank you, George. Dennis?
Yeah, hi, Dennis Hickey, our Global COO and CEO America for Lend-Lease Group.
Thank you so much, Tammy.
Hi, good morning. Tammy Jones, CEO of Basis Investment Group. I'm also the chair of Real Estate Executive Council, which is a trade organization similar to CREW to advance executives in African-American and Latinx executives in commercial real estate. I'm also the chair of the board of Mac Cali, and I'm excited to be here. And thank you, Commercial Observer and CREW, for hosting this amazing and important topic.
Thank you, Tammy. Mabad.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mabad Mir. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Mac Cali.
Thank you also very much. Again, so before we get started, I just want to say briefly that we realize that DEI covers a broad spectrum from the visible aspects of diversity, which is such as race and gender, to the invisible aspects such as cognitive diversity, behavioral and communication styles. This roundtable is a discussion of DEI as a whole, which of course, again, as I said, is a very big topic. The focus today is primarily on the diversity, equity, and inclusion in our panelist companies within their leadership and every level of management and employment. And we will hear what their companies are doing to facilitate opportunities, including but not limited to learning, growth, advancement, pay equity in gender, race, sexual identity, and disability, et cetera. I've asked the panelists to keep their remarks to within 2 minutes because we have so much, as I said, such a huge topic. And my first question is going to Dennis. Dennis, can you tell us what was the impetus for you to start on the DEI journey, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. Look, I think Lend-Lease has been on the DEI journey for a long time. Our heritage date is very rich in this area. I think we've done a lot in this space, and over the many years, we've focused a lot around sexual diversity. We've focused a lot about gender diversity, and we've done, some incredible things to progress, our diverse workforce. I think the issue around people of colour that have really arisen in the last, say, 12 to 18 months is something that I think most companies in America use the tragic incident of death of George Floyd, as a wake-up call, and what are we doing? And I think our company was the same. I think we were doing some, but we need to do more. And I think, that incident really kind of made everybody reflect and ask that question, what are we doing? Are we doing enough for our people of colour, particularly our Black community? And what can we do more? And what are some of the learnings that we've successfully done in areas of gender diversity and other forms of diversity that we need to bring into to this issue? So, we are very wide and awake, and we want to make a lot of progress in this area over the coming years.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for that. My next question will go to George. George, if you can tell us a little bit about if you have signed the CEO Action Pledge, and if so, what was, why? Tell us a little bit about it. Why did you decide?
Yeah, I signed the pledge because it aligned with the deep convictions and fundamental belief that the future of our success and growth as a company was directly tied to our diversity and inclusion. And the 4 tenets of the CEO Action Pledge align with our core values and our DE&I mission and vision, and have implemented firm actions to address. Mm-hmm. So we created our perspective listening series that allow the entire company to come together and discuss the often very tough but real challenges our employees face in a very candid and open environment. And that has been hugely impactful here over the last year. Since the George Floyd event, I think it really has brought to life a lot of very candid discussions and really understanding of the differences that exist within our company. I personally have been an active participant, not as the CEO, but as a participant in several of these sessions. I then spent an hour with the panelists post the sessions to further dialogue, understand, digest, and applaud the courage of our colleagues to be vulnerable and courageous in a public forum. And the most recent session that I participated in was the Disabilities perspective session. I told my story of growing up with a mother with severe arthritis that thrived on her work, but was very challenged, and how at an early age I learned to help out at home to enable her to stay active and be very successful and impactful with the work that she did in developing affordable elderly housing in my hometown. And under the guise of the 6 pillars of our D&I roadmap, we launched a formal Dni Training Program, which is one of the pillars across our enterprise, beginning with our leaders. And we chose to use the program that was built on behavioral science to ensure that we drive the right behaviors and then the actions as we build a rich culture of inclusion. And then another pillar is actively engaging our board. Our board of directors is very actively engaged in guiding the mission, vision, and our D&I progress. And the board is updated at every meeting on our key initiatives, representation, and the metrics that hold us accountable. And we believe that this is our moment to make meaningful and lasting change, as it is evidenced by our commitment to move the needle on our global female and U.S. minority representation, committing to double our representation by 2025. And recently we were recognized by Forbes as one of the best companies for diversity and inclusion in 2021, I think recognizing the amount of progress we've made over the last 12 or 18 months.
That sounds really good. Thank you for sharing that, and also your personal involvement in the various conversations. I'm sure is very, very helpful in making a big difference and a significant difference in your organization. Thank you for that response. Tammy, I'd like to address the next question to you. Can you share with us how important it is to educate your leadership as well as employees at every level on DE&I and their commitment and what they can do about it?
Sure, thank you. So first of all, change starts at the top. And as we've discussed, even in our preparation session, today about 78% of senior level jobs, executive level jobs in real estate are held by white men. And DE&I just didn't start with the George Floyd incident, and I get it's an awakening, but this has been a significant problem that I have been trying to fight along with others in the Reese organization for decades. And I'm so happy that we finally have a focus. But change has to start at the top, and we can look at all of these real estate firms, many, public, private, and we can start with looking at their boards. And it's so important to make sure that there is board, diversity that helps to partner with management to drive diversity at the management team level. And then it takes an intentional effort. I think that, I've met with a number of CEOs across the country in this awakening. And I've said, you have to have a diversity business plan, just like you run any business initiative. You have to have strategy. You have to have accountable people. You have to have performance metrics. And it's not just one thing, Carrie. You have to actually, when you're hiring, you have to know who you're partnering with to hire. And you have to demand that those firms that help you find talent are consistent and aligned with your own strategies. And so I do believe that, and it's not just about hiring and employment. When we talk about equity, it's also about who are you partnering with. This real estate industry is all about joint ventures and partnerships, and we're always, doing deals with people. But who are you doing deals with? Are you doing deals with any diverse people? Are you doing deals with women? Are you doing deals with minorities? That's how we can create wealth. And then also supplier diversity. Who are you partnering with? Who are your vendors? Are you selecting, vendors that are people of color and women? And so I think that there's a holistic, multifaceted approach. And then I'm excited about, by being on this panel and being a part of this discussion is that none of us can do this alone. We have to work together, because I think historically over the last 20 years, because I, as an African-American woman, I have definitely felt, the inclusion in this industry, but we kept fighting anyway. We were all poking at it and doing our own little individual things and trying to figure out how to do, bring in interns. And we all know that if you can't be it if you can't see it, so there's a retention problem. And so all of are ways that we have to work together, but it can't just be hiring. It has to be who you do.
You're absolutely right.
System.
And you know what, and that's exactly what you're saying is just, because we're talking, we're business people, and we know that you have to have a plan, and you're absolutely right, Tammy, a strategic plan, a diversity and a strategic plan. And maybe, some of you will have an opportunity to share if you have one in place. Generally what we do is like anywhere from 3 to 5 years, just like any other strategic plan, so that it is all inclusive, because you can't just, like you said, poke at this. You got to definitely be able to have a vision for what it is that you want to accomplish. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. And now I'm going to ask a question to Mabad. Mabad, can you talk a little bit about, am I saying your name correctly? Let me ask you that.
Marbod, it's absolutely fine. Yeah,
Marbod.
you are.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
It's not a common name.
Okay, I know, and it's always helpful to be able and respectful to say it correctly when I can.
That's very kind. I'm not sensitive, but that's very kind. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So my question for you then is, how is your organization approaching the issue of DE&I, and do you have an action plan? Just following up on what Tammy was just saying.
Yeah. So Tammy will be aware of this, being the chair of our company, but I think we're in a fortunate position that since there was a rotation and wholesale change of board and leadership at Matt Cali, there's been the coming together of I'd say people who share a certain vision, a certain perspective on what culture should look like, on what drives value, on what drives performance. Mm-hmm. And for us, I would say this is really firmly woven into the culture, the go-forward culture of the business. And there's a moral component to it. It is not right to discriminate between people. We are all equal, and the moral component starts and ends with that. But there's a real business component to it too. I don't see why in business it should be any different to, say, in sport, where in sport you will pick the top athletes with presumably diverse skill set. Each athlete on whichever field it is you're talking about will bring something different to the pitch. And at the end of the day, what you really care about is having the best athletes on the pitch to win ultimately whatever sport that is, whatever match that is, you want to win. And we want to succeed as a business. And so for us, there's a real a business component to this, where we feel having employees from diverse backgrounds, which who will all have a different perspective when it comes to problem solving, when it comes to seeing opportunity, creating an equitable environment where each of them can be rewarded according to the contribution that they make and are not held back for wrong reasons and bias, and an inclusive environment where everyone feels part of a company, feels the culture, understands it, understands the vision, and feels part of that family that we're looking to create. Mm-hmm. I think has a lot of benefits too. When it comes to, we all want to feel we're part of something, and we all do more. We go that extra mile when we feel like that cause is worthwhile, and when we feel appreciated, when we feel valued, when we feel respected. Mm-hmm. So for us, there's been an element of really, firstly, fostering an environment where these issues are openly discussed and prioritized, because you do have to be proactive about it. You can't really be reactive to it. It's been tracking and understanding the baseline, and being based in New Jersey, we're in a state that is quite diverse culturally to begin with, and we should really see that as an opportunity. And then it's devising a plan, and there are some early steps that we've taken. We have much more of a diverse board and management team than we had 14 months ago, but there's a lot more to do. We have implemented a number of employee affinity groups. We have the Matt Cali Women's Leadership Network with around 80 members, for whom we organize a number of events, including charity events. It's been hugely successful. We have Embrace, which really focuses on ethnic and gender and LGBTQ and other categorizations. And we're looking to put in place training, so subconscious bias training at the board level, at the management level, and internal protocols to make sure that, to the extent that we can, we're ensuring that bias doesn't feed into decision making. So removing names, dates of birth, educational dates from CVs, things like that is really things that we're looking at doing to make sure that where decisions are made, it's truly made based on merit and nothing else.
That's excellent. Sounds very good. And so are you following, do you have like a blueprint, an action plan in place right now that you're following? All of the things that you're saying are excellent. You touch upon all of the most important pieces to actually move your organization forward in terms of becoming more inclusive.
Yeah, I'd say it's we do have a framework that we've been following, but to me, this isn't about reaching necessarily a destination. I don't think you ever stop, and I think that blueprint evolves, and I think the path we take evolves, and we should continue to be looking at ways that we can ever move closer to our targets. So I'll give you another real life example. The way that we went about selecting our interns this year was very different to the way it had been done historically. Historically, it was based on referrals, friends and family, and you can imagine, what that promoted. This time we took the step of saying, well, actually, going to move away from that. It cannot be friends and family. Like, now let's actually go and let's look a little bit deeper. Let's look for that talent in places where it might be a little bit harder to find, and schools where you might not normally look. But let's try and give an opportunity to those that ultimately would feel deserve it, that otherwise may not have been able to seek an opportunity in a company like ours. And let's invest in them. And that's working out really well for us. I'm a huge believer in looking for talent in hard to find places. But as Tammy said earlier, this is something that you've really got to focus on and proactively and put the time into, and not see it as an inconvenience to doing business, but actually a facilitator, an activator of business.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really important. I just want to add, you mentioned that you're right. It's a journey. I used to tell people, as you know, I've been doing this, engaged in this work for nearly more than 30 years now. I used to tell people that this was it wasn't the destination, it was really about the journey. And I'll have to tell you, over the last couple of years, I've changed that to say that the journey is the destination. There's no place to get to. You're constantly evolving and moving this forward. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask, I'd like to ask Dennis if you can respond to the, how important are resource groups? Do you have any in your company? And if so, how important are they?
Kerry, thanks for that. Look, we have ERG, employee resource groups, and we've had them for well over 10 or 15 years. They're critically important. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said by the other panelists. This is a journey, and we need to be vigilant about change, and that comes from embracing everybody in the organisation. So our ERGs, we have a number of ERG groups across America and across the globe. We have a Women at Lend-Lease, we have an LGBTQ, we have a multicultural forum, we have a caregivers forum, we have a Black forum. Each of those forums and ERG groups have a leader, and they're empowered to drive change and drive agendas. Those leaders of each of those groups then sit on a DNI advisory council, where I chair that advisory council myself. We get all of the leaders from the ERG. We also get external representatives to sit on that ERG and give us what's happening outside of Lend-Lease. So we get other influences and we can learn from other people and other industries, not just real estate. There are people in other industries who are doing some wonderful things. So we take it really seriously, try and structure around that. And then, our strategy is really built around 4 pillars, which we've kind of touched on before. It's around culture. It's creating the right culture, the safety, the comfort and the respect around that. It's really built around talent development. So you need to develop from within. It's not just recruitment. You do need to have that mentor program that I think Tammy was talking about. And how do you actually drive people and give people in your organization an opportunity and proactively promote them into roles? It's also about recruitment. And then the last thing is about external partnerships. And again, Tammy referred to that before. We do a lot in the MWB space. For example, Lend-Lease, we've directed over $1 billion in the last 2 years to MWBE consultants and construction groups across our construction business. And so it is about driving, your focus into bringing other people into the solution. So again, similar to what people have said today, but we're very focused on that agenda on all of those 4 buckets.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much for that. And it sounds like you've also integrated the groups by bringing them together into
Yep.
into a council. So there's a lot of cross communication going on. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Dennis. George, let me ask you, have you determined, we've talked a lot about developing a strategic plan or blueprint, if you will. Have you determined a method for tracking DEI metrics within your company?
Yeah, so I would start by saying, we've got a holistic approach in how we're going about our DE&I, and it's absolutely embedded in all of our strategy. It's all about not only becoming a high-performing company, but that's supported with a high-performing growth culture. And we realize that we can't achieve that goal without DE&I. We've got 100,000 employees globally, so you can imagine all of the talent pools that we draw from. It's very important that we lead, and we lead with diversity. Our leadership is intentional, and it begins with me and my direct reports, actively leading, engaging, and supporting not only, Dennis talked about the BRGs, but all of our DE&I efforts. Our approach is simple. We embed DE&I in all of our work into our culture and everything we do. And this work isn't a program. It's really, and it's not personality centric. And it's supported by a mission, vision, and roadmap that was centered on not only in DE&I initiatives, but how that becomes fundamental to our culture, our work behaviors and actions. And as I talked about earlier, we have a 6-pillar roadmap that has accountability across the organization. I am a big proponent of scorecards and tracking. Once you establish a strategy, how do you then implement and get the full, buy-in across the organization? And I think it's very important from a leadership standpoint that we have the right metrics. What gets measured gets done, as we all say. We report our D&I progress monthly, alongside modeling reports to assist our leaders in using the data to make well-informed D&I decisions. With the goals and objectives, and not only hard goals and objectives on pure numbers, but then it's more about the leadership and the behaviors. We measure that with our organizational health, and we actually have a strategy around how we improve organizational health and the importance of DE&I within that. And that all is then aligned to achieving our roadmap that gets to doubling our representation, of women and minorities here over the next 3 to 4 years. And so these metrics not only cascade throughout all of my leadership team, but actually are in the performance goals and objectives across the company that tier up to the commitments that we've made.
That's great.
We've
That's
made
excellent.
great progress over the last 18 months. I would tell you that we're on track with the goals that we've committed to. And it's more important, what I've learned is more of the behaviors that develops the culture and changes how people work, that embrace the difference. That is very, very important in how you drive innovation, how you ultimately attract all of the best talent globally and how we work. And that, I believe, is having the biggest impact in how we're now in this war for talent, how we're actually recruiting really talented talent.
Yeah, you have to. Absolutely.
Very diverse.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happening. In fact, we predicted, as part of the research that I was doing, we predicted some 20 years ago that by this time there would be a war on talent. We didn't know all of the things that were going to go into making that happen. And then we actually, we can see that happening now. Thank you so much for that. And you shared a lot of great information for our audience to hear, just different ways and approaches and methods that they can actually take in moving and advancing a DEI initiative. So thank you all for that. Your answers are really great. And we're getting some questions in, so we will be fielding some questions in a few moments. I did have a couple more questions. I'll start with Tammy. I'm going to ask you, and Mabad, I'm going to follow up with the same question for you. How can executives, in our listening audience, educate themselves on DE&I? So Tammy, if you can just share a minute or two on that, and we'll ask Mabad the same.
Oh, sure. So I don't know, Carrie, I was trying to jump in before earlier. I'm used to being more interactive on panels, and I guess you didn't hear me, but I wanted to say a couple of quick things, and I'll come to your question.
Yes, please do.
Number one, what Mabad said about changing the process with interns, I want everyone in the audience to also think about not friends and family for boards, because there's a barrier to entry in getting on boards because people don't know people of color or women. And so we have to actually, change the way we're approaching, getting diverse both ethically diverse and gender diverse board members. So we have to really break down the barrier because, as we all know, real estate is a closed network. Sometimes it's a legacy industry. And so it really, as an industry, we have to be really meticulous in breaking down all these barriers across all the things that our panelists said. Now, as it relates to educating, yourself, I think you have to start with the word intentionality. It's not just about training. Those are great. And it's not even just about having metrics, but it's about really coming up with, like we said before, a strategy that's intentional. And I'll tell you, I'm really proud of Basis because I like to be the testimony of what can happen if you're intentional over, the 12 years that we've been in business. 78% of our team is women and minorities. So don't ever tell me you can't find us, because we can. I've invested and loaned $1 billion with people who look like me and women. Really proud of that. 50% of our vendors are women and minority-owned firms. It just doesn't happen. You have to actually push yourself to do this. And you have to make sure that you are open to your own unconscious bias, right? As a leader, try to figure out where it is that you have a blind spot, whether it's with, Dennis said, people with disabilities, whether it's with, something with the LGBT community. We have to make sure we're including everyone, whether it's, ethnicity. And so I think it's important that we look at ourselves, which is why Mabad said that we are having a unconscious bias training at the board level. I'm chair of the McNally board, and we're starting there, right? And we're also going to do it at the company level. But I think, again, it's not a one size fits all approach. It is not one thing. It really has to be, and I'm happy to hear that my fellow CEOs are taking an integrated approach. I think that's the biggest
absolutely
I've seen this time around. And you know what? The jury's still out for me. I love pledges. I think that they're great, but they are worth the paper they are written on if you do not back it up with all of this stuff. And so I want to check in. I hope Commercial Observer does it again, because I want to check in again on the progress. So I think
happening. That makes perfect sense. Thank you so much for that. Mabad, you want to give us a minute, and we're going to go to some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, understanding the principles of DNI is not complicated. Being convinced of the merits of implementing those principles into your business should take a minute. It's a no-brainer. So really, I think the education is, Tammy said, it's really about being honest with yourself. So it's understanding the baseline, looking for ways to improve continuously, making sure it's a priority, making sure it's woven into the decisions that you make, the day-to-day decisions and the strategic decisions that you make, so that you can actually start to affect change. Because I think someone said this at the beginning, it really starts at the top. If we don't affect the change, it's not going to happen. And that's how to approach it. One other thing I would say, though, is we do also have to just be intellectually honest with ourselves and ask the question of why are there not more women in the industry? Why are there not more people of ethnic backgrounds in the industry, particularly at senior levels? And what can we do to encourage those groups and other groups into the industry, knowing that based on their merits, based on their achievements, they too can also be successful and reach really any heights that they want. There is a problem for me here whereby what we don't want to be doing, to me, you don't solve the problem. If we all end up competing for talent and hiring within the industry without actually helping attract more people from minority backgrounds or diverse backgrounds into the industry, then it risks just becoming a case of musical chairs. And that's not what we really want. So there is a root component to this as well, where I think beyond, and I think Dennis said this, beyond just hiring, it's not just about recruitment, it's about training, and it's about going to the source and enabling others to enter the industry, knowing that there are opportunities for them to be able to succeed.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to just, we have a couple of questions here. There's a question that's directed to you, George, that says, what are the matrices that you utilize to hold the board accountable, to hold your board accountable? If you can just give us a 1-minute response to that, so we can get to a couple more questions.
We have all of the hiring metrics and making sure that we're tracking to our plans to be able to be much more diverse in our leadership ranks. We're making great progress there. Most important, though, I believe, is more of the organizational health. We have been very deliberate in how we're assessing our organizational health, and diversity, equity, and inclusion are an important element of that. And it really does give us a sense, because building off of what Tammy said and Dennis, this is transformation through leadership. And, I've been doing a lot of diversity and inclusion for years, and I view that as being very programmatic in how we went about it. I think what's happened here in the last 18 months is really reversing that and being leader-led and listening and being very deliberate in changing behaviors and understanding difference, and then being able to put that to work in how you're developing those leaders and positioning those leaders for bigger responsibilities and creating the confidence that they can take that next step, and then provide the support structure to be able to take the next step. So we're very deliberate, not only in building the pipelines and obviously demonstrating that we're significantly improving our leadership diversity, but it's more important about leadership, behaviors, engagement, and we're measuring that at the organizational health level. And you can see, in the data where we're making progress and where we're not, and that data is reviewed right up through the board. And then we identify areas for improvement or changes that ultimately is going to get to what we believe is a high-performing culture that is built off of diversity. And that diversity is what's going to be the fuel to our future success.
Thank you, George. I'm going to have to move on now. We'll make sure we get to some other questions. Tammy, there was a comment that says, it seems like a lot of firms love to, someone said your comment interests them. It seems like a lot of firms love to preach DEI, but do not put their money where their mouth is. Is anyone comfortable sharing if they work with MWBE companies, and specifically which ones? So it was a general question. They just wanted to piggyback on what you said. So does anybody have anything they'd like to share in response to that question? We'll take a minute on this one and move on.
I mean, I can jump in. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I was going to say, as I mentioned, we have invested and loaned $1 billion with women and minority-owned businesses. There are hundreds of companies that we do business with across not just the investment spectrum, but also as our lawyers, as our appraisers, as our compliance firms. I mean, you name it. You can just do a matrix, which is what I would suggest people do, of who you do business with, and just give yourself a report card. And if you don't know the answer, if you don't know if you do business with women and minority-owned companies, then that should be a goal, right? So just start there. And I think again, it's intentional efforts. It's literally breaking down where you can be inclusive. And this is about equity, because I think that there's been a focus, and we needed to have a focus on hiring and recruiting and training, but we also need to have a focus on including folks in this vast business, this $15 trillion commercial real estate business that has all these different places where people of color and women can participate. And so yes, I mean, we have actually a goal in one of our funds right now to do 30% of the fund investments with women and minority-owned businesses. So I'm super excited about that. And we're not a social impact fund. I'll say one final thing. Diverse teams produce better outcomes. And as fiduciaries of capital, as people that are putting out money or creating shareholder value, if you're a public company, as fiduciaries, if you don't have a diverse team, I would argue that you're probably not, putting forth the best group to be able to achieve the outsized returns. And so I do think it's important that we think of it as a business imperative, in addition to all of the other things that we said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And that gives me the next question is, what advice would you give someone starting up an MBW, a company, a minority women business owned company? And anyone can respond to that. Do you have any advice that you can give them? We have about a minute to respond to that, please.
For me, since I started one, I think you have to believe in yourself. I think you have to figure out how to get capital. Access to capital is one of the biggest challenges facing women and minority-owned companies. I say this anytime I get to say that. And so that's one thing that we all need to realize in the industry, that being able to provide access to capital and credit could really help MWBE firms thrive. And so I think, in starting a firm, you have to have a strategy, you have to build your track record, you have to figure out where to get capital from and how to access capital. And I think the industry hopefully will be focused on doing deals with people of color and women, so that way we can build the track records and then, raise capital based on performance.
And Carrie, I would add to that. It's very important. I think that every company is looking to be able to build a much more diverse supply base. And so really doing whatever your business is, doing it really well, and then partnering with companies that truly can be the catalyst to being able to launch a business, because we're in the space and we, $24 billion and 2/3 of that we procure, and we're always fighting for a much more diverse supply base. So if you can align with a leader in the space and do something really well, you're going to be able to get a lot of support. So once you get the capital that Tammy talked about, the opportunity to be able to be positioned to grow and be successful is going to be aligned with the winners in the space.
Thank you. Dennis, did you want to share something, Dennis?
No, I'm just really going to build on what both Tammy and George said. And I think the thing is to also just to network, is to be present, to get out, to do all of the things that entrepreneurs do, and to make sure that you meet as many people as you can and make yourself visible. There are a lot of people who want to listen. No one's going to knock on your door and ask you to come and work for them. So you've got to kind of get out and put yourself out there and to try and find those doors that are open, because I think that sort of support can come from many places. So I just encourage everybody to do that. And organizations have lots of tentacles to kind of reach into in various places.
Right, and thank you for that, and keeping in mind the fact that you are all opening your doors and putting signs on the doors now. It will make it easier for people to knock on those doors. So thank you very much for doing that. Okay, Tammy, I just have one question. Have you developed metrics for in your company in terms of measuring these initiatives?
Well, I've been doing it from the time that I founded Basis. I wanted to be the change that I didn't see in the industry, and so yes. As I said, we have 78% of our team are women and minorities, so we are exceeding our metrics. We probably started, 5 or even 7 years ago with saying that we wanted to achieve 50%. And so we are very intentional on that, as not to keep repeating, but also we track where our vendors are. We are 50% right now. We want to increase that to 60%, over the next 3 years. So we keep pushing to make sure, and we're obviously looking for the most qualified people. They are not mutually exclusive, the most qualified vendors. But we think that if we are making sure that we're sourcing and looking at the whole landscape and being inclusive in all of our searches for who we do business with, that we're going to get the best performance. So,
okay, excellent, thank you. Let's see. Anyone else would? Let me ask you this: did you find that? Did you all? If you did not sign the pledge, I'll start with that. Would you share with us what the interest is, why you would decided that was not in your best benefit?
Well, I didn't sign the pledge, and it's not because I don't think that a pledge is great. I just think that the pledge, as I mentioned before, I've seen these pledges come and go over the last 20 years. This is not the first time that we've had a push for diversity, and so for me. And I said this to my sisters in crew, I feel like I'm not pledging to do something. Diversity is in my DNA. I'm already doing it. It's I gave you our metrics and our plan. I do think, but I do support the pledge. I also want to make sure that folks are tracking, like we see who has signed the pledge, and we come back, and now I'm putting my Real Estate Executive Council board chair hat on, and that we help people. If you sign the pledge and you can't move the needle, reach out to Reese, reach out to crew. We can help you with strategies, because again, if we just sign the pledge because we're swept up in the moment, and I've seen that before, then it doesn't help us. So there are places to go. There are trade organizations that are super focused on this. And so I would just implore everyone to, if you don't know where to start, ask for help, ask for partnership. And I do think there are people that are out there that can help. So no, I didn't sign it. Not that I'm against it, but just, gave you.
Makes sense. Thank you so much. And you know what, we have 1 minute remaining. And I did want to say that you're right. One of the things that those that sign the pledge can do is hold each other accountable. That's one thing to do. And if we're all, holding one another accountable, then we can advance this and move it forward. Dennis, would you any final comments from you as it relates to the DEI initiative and what you're doing that you would like to add? And then
no, look, I think the conversations like these are great. I think the more awareness we can learn from each other. Tammy, we signed the pledge not because it's anything revolutionary. We're already on that journey, but it's a signal to our people and our commitment, and we make ourselves accountable. And we are doing that to hold ourselves accountable. And we're members of other initiatives and other benchmarks. So from my end, thanks so much for the opportunity to have a chat about this. It's a really important issue, and we're excited to see if we can help move the needle, or we will move the needle. So that's important.
Well, thank you all very much for your responses. I believe we're just about out of time here. I want to, and we got some additional questions in, and people have also received the information to contact you individually if they would like to follow up. And I just want to say that it was just a pleasure interacting with you and listening to all of the great things you're doing. Keep it up, please.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you to Carrie, and thank you to all of the panelists for such a great discussion there. I think such great advice for the conversation. Now, without further ado, we'll move on to our second panel of the day, understanding the infrastructure of equity and how CRE can accelerate greater opportunity. Your moderator is Fuquan Collins, Senior Director of Community and Citizenship at Turner Construction Company. And Fuquan is joined by Maxine Carrington, Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at Northwell Health, Lisa Gomez, Chief Operating Officer at L&M Development Partners, Morgan Malone, Director of Development and External Affairs at Farpoint Development, and Vincent Toy, Head of Agency and Off-Balance Sheet Lending at JP Morgan Chase. Over to you, Fuquan.
Fuquan, you're on mute.
I went a whole year without having to be told I'm on mute, but that went out the window. But thank you, Kathy, for that introduction, and welcome everyone. Good morning to all of our audience members. We've prepared hopefully for what will be a very insightful and engaging panel discussion. As was mentioned, my name is Fuquan Collins, Vice President of Community and Citizenship for Turner Construction. At this point, I'm just going to turn it over to our panelists so they can also give a brief introduction with themselves. So why don't we start in alphabetical order? We'll start with you, Maxine.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Maxine Carrington, representing Northwell Health. We are the largest health system in New York, largest private employer. Really pleased to be here. There's such connection to everything that's been discussed, healthcare and housing. And so I'm just glad that we can connect the dots together and have the conversation today. Looking forward to learning.
And Lisa?
Hi, thanks, Fuquan. I'm Lisa Gomez of L&M Development Partners. We are a 40-year-old vertically integrated real estate development company. We build, we manage, we invest, and we own primarily affordable housing properties in the New York metro area, but are also in other parts of the country. Really looking forward to getting to know my other panelists and some folks in the audience.
Thank you. And Morgan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Malone. I'm the Director of Development and External Affairs at Farpoint Development. Farpoint is a commercial real estate firm based in Chicago. We are also in the Southeast. We're agnostic. We do a little bit of everything, but our claim to fame right now is that we are managing the $3.8 billion mega development Bronzeville Lakefront on Chicago's South Side, and are working to make it the most equitable development in the country. So we are really excited to share those insights with you all today.
Thank you, Morgan. And finally, Vincent, please.
Vince Toy. I'm located in New York City. I'm the head of agency and off-balance sheet lending at JP Morgan.
Thank you so much. So for our first question, really want to get all of your responses to this one because we think it's a very poignant question. For the most part, traditional DE&I efforts have always focused on the moral imperative. But can you please describe how your team has always presented the business case for DE&I? So why don't we start first, please, with Vincent?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, from my own business perspective, it's as things have changed, and especially when you look at the folks who are impacted especially I spend a lot of time working on affordable housing, that aspect of the business, and in the commercial real estate space. It's a lot of the minority communities. Those are the residents there. So it's important to be able to service them and do things that work for them. But also, as times change and folks change throughout the business, it's just important as we look at it as if you need a diverse team to be able to work with diverse clients. And this client base continues to change. You know, folks like Tammy from the previous panel and others who are in decision-making positions, it's really important that you have folks from a broad background to help you be successful, because if everyone's coming to do their business from the same perspective, you're not going to move forward. So that's sort of how we've taken it as I've built my business, but also the firm overall. We just say, you know, being part of JP Morgan, we're in all the different businesses, and you need to meet every client where they are. And that means that you're going to need to have folks who look like them, who can service them as well. And that's what's helped the firm be very successful for where they are today and where they want to be in the future.
Excellent, thank you. Lisa, I'll toss it to you. Same question. How's your team developed the business case for DE&I?
I don't know that we are developing the business case. I like to think that we are on the journey of living the business case. Our company is nearly 3/4 women or minority, including in leadership positions. And I think one thing that we're particularly proud of, we have double the national average of women on the construction team, which, as you know from your work at Turner, is that's something we all sort of strive to do. Much like what Vince said, you know, I think that the real estate is the intersection of people and place. And in the world of affordable housing, it's really important that we meet the communities where they are and that our people can bring their lived experience to the communities. There's, you know, I joke with my kids that we have a running stream of evil real estate developer movies like Hoot or Up, where, you know, the evil real estate developer is coming to raise the playground or kick the kids out of the orphanage. And I think the reality of our industry is that there are a lot of people motivated from a good place. And I think it's really important that our teams look like the communities in which we build.
Excellent. I really appreciate that point, that you're living that business case for DE&I. Morgan, I tossed a question to you as well.
For sure. And I think probably many of us have seen recently the report that, you know, during the pandemic, $50 billion was committed to social impact, and we've spent $250 million. The social impact imperative is there. The social impact dollars are there. Consumers want to know that they're in buildings that are thoughtful and sustainable and regenerative. And so it's become more of a less, are we just making the business case and how do we convince people to do it? More of a mandate. You know, I live in a city where the mayor's office mandates that from developers. They mandate diverse participation in the context of all contracts. They mandate diverse hiring, you know, and they want to see good faith efforts to trying to do that. And they have a city council that's behind them on doing that. And so it's not really a question for us, especially developing in the city of Chicago, whether or not DEI is a part of what we're doing, because we really didn't have to do the business case considering it was a requirement for the model. And I think everyone is starting to shift to be more socially impactful. For a long time, DEI was the hot topic, and everyone was talking about it, and you could do it in a surface level way. And I think now we're moving into what does social impact really mean? And there is a business case for including social impact at every touch point for the way that we do development, from pre-development all the way through leasing. And so we're pretty excited to pioneer a lot of that work and push it farther than it's ever been.
Excellent, excellent. And Maxine, please, your response.
Yeah, sure. Echoing a lot of what's been said, I think, so Northwell, I would say over 10 years ago, we created what was called then our Center for Equity of Care. And it was very much focused on patient and community. The workforce side wasn't as developed. And so we come along a few years later in 2019, we start to create what would become our Fair Employment Practices team to really marry, together with the Center for Equity of Care and really complete the model with a huge focus on workforce. And so we're over 77,000 team members today, very, very diverse. learning what we did over the last 10 years, we knew as we were developing the workforce side, we would have to advance the business case. The moral imperative is there. People would lean into that. We have no doubt. We're a caring culture. We're a caring industry, given the work that we do. We're also an evidence-based culture and industry. Science is the standard. And so folks would want to understand beyond the moral imperative, what are going to be the outcomes? What are going to be the benefits? And so we had to not only articulate that, but equip people to be able to speak to it when they go out into our communities, when they're in their homes, wherever they are. And so prior, I would say in 2019, we began this listening tour following the example of Johnson & Johnson and others. And what we did, it was validated through what we heard. So we understood a couple of things. One, the evidence-based aspect, but also some resistance, assumptions, misinformation, comments like, this is all good, but we have to make sure people are talented and that we're hiring talented people. And so, I had to kind of measure my response often internally because we're Northwell. And so in our minds, of course, talent is a standard, it's baseline. But people still have that assumption that we are hiring for metrics, quotas, that sort of thing, versus the business case. And so for us, we found it helpful a couple of years ago to lead with that, in addition to the moral imperative, to help us accelerate and get to where we are today.
So really interesting perspectives, because you see it from all different facets, really, of the real estate industry, whether it was something that was more kind of organic, cultural driven, L&M, mandate driven, or even data and science driven. I really appreciate all those different perspectives. So my next question is, as the built environment moves towards more of an impact and social responsibility, what does equitable development look like? And how can we actually actualize equitable development? So I'll start with you, Morgan, first on that one.
Yeah, when we built out our model and we think about equitable development, we also think about social impact. We think about who's at the table. Our internal practices, policies, procedures, culture, and biases, our external impact, as well as at every touch point of this development, from pre-development to leasing, how do we infuse social impact and equity and justice into that work? And so that's how we come at development. And what that looks like different than other developments is where you may hear, hey, we did a community town hall, we got their feedback, we incorporated that into this work. That is not what we did. We partnered with the community and we included them as a third-party negotiator in all of our meetings with the city and co-designed all of our design guidelines and zoning for our site. And so for a lot of people, that's a big lift. That's something very new, and it requires a lot of community involvement and a large learning curve, a lot of education and a lot of thoughtful partnership. But that made the product so much better. And for that reason, we are one of the most beloved mega developments in the city with no community pushback, because the community feels that level of ownership. We went into this project thinking about community wealth building. We went into this project thinking about equity and justice, and not just, are we able to hit our supplier diversity numbers? Are we able to hit our workforce numbers? But what do people need to feel safe in this space, to feel affirmed and acknowledged in this space? How do we amplify the innovation and culture that was already in this community and bring it to the world? Bronzeville is a historically Black community in Chicago, and it is the most historic Black community in Chicago. It is essentially our Harlem. That said, stop off on the Great Migration. We have a very proud community. We have a lot of residents who care a lot about historical and cultural preservation. And so we knew going into this that would need to be a main tenet of our work. We knew going into this that resident voices needed to not only be affirmed, but also be co-designers throughout the process for the long haul. And that even though we were making commitments like 10% of our retail discounted by 20% for small and local businesses, there were going to be wraparound supports needed. So we needed a support network, a provider network of nonprofits that do small business development, that do workforce development, that do all of these things to support the execution of our outcomes. We understand that equitable development isn't just on the developer. In order to get to truly equitable development, you need an ecosystem of partners from the public sector, the private sector, nonprofits, et cetera, who are all pulling from their side of the rope in the same direction at the same time for a sustained period. And so that was really how we did it and how we built out this model. But we have found that community input, and in full like community ownership and design, being thoughtful for equity and justice and not just diversity in numbers, and being consistent has really made all the difference to our project.
Excellent. I appreciate that. And that whole community engagement piece really goes to destigmatize kind of what Lisa mentioned, right? That whole perception of the big bad developer. And as a native son of Harlem, I appreciate the shout out there to Harlem as well. I'd like to get one more perspective on that question. Perhaps Lisa, how maybe we can kick that to you in terms of what the actualizing of equalizing looks like for development.
Sure. I mean, it sounds like Chicago has a different kind of land use process than we do in New York. But I think, one thing that Morgan mentioned, which was, really sort of probably what enabled, I'm guessing, some of the success was sort of the scale of your project. You can bring so many people to the table. And I think it's harder in some ways in a smaller project because you don't have the focus, you don't have sort of the political will. I'll say that on our larger projects, my background behind me is our Universal Hip Hop Museum. And I think, in a large municipal project like that, which sounds in the vein of what Morgan is doing in Chicago, I think you really have an opportunity to bring together culture, art, jobs, after school, safety, broad participation by both community members, by local businesses. There's just so many stakeholders. Real estate really is the intersection of people and place. And I that's sort of one of the things I love about it, because it's a left brain, right brain kind of work. And I think when you do have these large projects, you do have the opportunity to sort of try something different and take risks that maybe it's harder to do in your everyday bread and butter projects. I will say on things like the Universal Hip Hop Museum or on our very large Essex Crossing development, or even, to bring healthcare into it, the nexus of healthcare and housing is so important, and it's almost so just sort of a given. We did a project with the St. Barnabas Hospital in the Bronx that was really meant as sort of an experimental thing to see if they could use housing to divert emergency room usage from and sort of get more primary care. So I think you do have opportunities. I think it's harder to find those in the sort of everyday work that most of us do, but I think it's really important to keep trying.
Excellent, thank you. I have another question I want to get to, and again, I'd love to hear from the entire panel on this one. So we know during the course of the pandemic, systemic racism has really been top of mind for many individuals. So what does that look like when it comes to the commercial real estate industry? And I'd like to get the full panel's response to that. Maybe perhaps we could start with Vincent.
I think it's, when you think about the real estate industry, just the way it works, when you think about it, it's evolved over time, where primarily it was very few minorities and very few women at all, as Lisa talked about earlier. L&M and her firm, there were more women there in the construction industry piece of the business. So it's just systemic, where it's just like the process, the way it was built, a lot of it's been broker-driven businesses. So everything is sort of, well, I'll take care of you. This is my buddy. We went to school together. Hey, we know this one. So throughout the ecosystem, it was pretty much tied to relationship driven. And it was really hard for folks to sort of break into it. And I think over time, as things have evolved, you've got more women and people of color in the different positions. And you've also gotten them, especially on the equity side. I think that's been part of the driving side, when you've gotten a new fund, different funds that have been developed that are led by women or minority leaders in those funds, and they're making equity decisions on what type of deals they're doing. They're able to help drive who's doing the construction piece of the business, what deals am I going to invest in, where we're going to invest in these transactions, and how we're going to look at it, where they have a little more power, because again, the power comes from who has the money, who's making the decisions. So I think over time, real estate has really evolved and continues to evolve. I think a lot of especially on the multifamily side, if you look at National Multi-Housing Council, which is one of the main trade groups, as well as ULI, they've taken a very proactive stance of trying to bring more women into those organizations, bringing more minorities in, and putting those in the rooms with senior folks and making different development programs to help expose people to real estate, because it is an industry, especially on the commercial real estate side, that traditionally you haven't had a lot of women and minorities in. But if you looked over the last, when I think about when I got in the business 20 some years ago, when I go to these different conferences, a lot of times I was the only person of color in the room. That's changed. There were only a few women. Now there's a lot more women, but we still have a long way to go. And I think the way we do that is also bringing people in at the lower level, or from when recruiting folks, college, to bring in analyst programs, property management programs, that folks are taking a proactive approach to go out to schools, historically Black colleges and universities and other schools, to attract those folks in, to make them think about commercial real estate as a business, because a lot of them really thought about, I want to go to investment banking, I want to go to consulting, I want to be a lender, but not really real estate. So it's required us to be very proactive and also get outside of our bounds, and also force people to think about, who am I doing business with, to bring different folks into the room and not just be the old boys network, because you still see it in some cases. Every deal gets done by, hey, this broker, this lender, this person, and you look at it, say, oh, they all went to the same school, or they're all affiliated with the same place. And that's what's got to continue to be pushed and changed.
Thank you, Vincent. Maxine, please.
So I guess I'll take it in a slightly different direction. I'm not an expert in this particular field, though, of course, given our geography, we have a lot of holdings, for sure, real estate holdings. I think in the context of community and population health, so much has been written, and I think everyone understands this concept of social determinants of health. You know, how do we unencumber folks to be able to access healthcare in an equitable way? How do we address issues that impact on health and better health outcomes, right? And we know that housing is one of them. And so, you know, so many health systems have focused on this for years. You look at a Kaiser Permanente, Cleveland Clinic, and others, and we're certainly seeking to be a leader in this space as well. So first, we declared some time ago racism as a public health crisis. We definitely see the connection, as we do gun violence, as we do environmental racism, and so many things we speak out on and seek to do work around. And then, you know, when we think about our communities and this content in the context of social determinants, we are looking at education. And so we are going to schools and working with kids as early as elementary school, so that we can, one, influence education, influence the home, obviously leading to better health outcomes over time. We're looking at housing. Is housing, or the lack thereof, vulnerability, food insecurity, housing, all of these items influencing and impacting people's ability to access health, have better health outcomes? And so for us, it's not just the acute episode of you come into the hospital and we treat you and we release you. It's how do we engage with you from cradle, I won't say to the grave, but beyond, to ensure that we're doing everything and connecting with you at every vulnerable point, every moment that matters, to ensure better health outcomes. And I think that isn't, healthcare has evolved in that way over the years to understand the influence of all of these other factors, including housing. So definitely a focus for us.
Thank you, Maxine. And Lisa, please.
Yeah, I like to think about, I agree with so much of what Vincent said. And I think, you know, I've been in this business a long time, and I've, you know, seen it change. My husband was actually the first Black head of the Real Estate Board of New York, which in New York is our it's our equivalent of ULI. And, you know, I looked around at these pictures of old white guys on the wall, and there was my husband at the end. And, you know, it has changed a lot. There's still so much further to go. But I think of it as a funnel. I think we need to get more people in the top of the funnel, so that more people are coming out the bottom and are successful in construction and development, investment, in healthcare. Even in public jobs. I mean, so many people sort of, you know, are on the government side that are important, that we all work with. So, you know, for us, we have a school that's across the street from our office that we've sort of adopted it's an AP government class, and we do, what is real estate? What is real estate development? So we're introducing high school kids to the field. We also have a pretty robust internship program where we're really we really try very, very hard not to hire people's sons and daughters. Like, we really want the kids who don't have the relationships, to sort of have somebody, pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, can my kid work for you this summer? So we're trying to give young people from schools who maybe don't have the access. I think one of the things that, I personally aim to do is I try to be the person that I wish I had coming up, who could make that call on my behalf, who would have that informational coffee. So I do spend a lot of time talking to people and sort of trying to, help give them access and connections, because that's what this business is about. It's about access, it's about connections, it's about real relationships. So, personally for me, that's an important thing.
Thank you, Lisa. And Morgan, please.
Yeah, to take this in a little bit of a different direction, I think pipeline development is critical, and we all should be working on it and feel responsible for that work. And a lot of what Vincent said, I also agree with. I think one of the things that I try to center in my work is that real estate doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's impacting people. The built environment impacts lives. And so when we think about systemic racism, I think about the fact that when we started off in the development of property, the experiences of those most marginalized, the contributions of those most marginalized were not considered as integral to the understanding of the industry. They weren't considered at all. And now we are doing a lot of work around DEI, and it's an aside, it's an addition to. Yes, we have how we've always done it, but also I want to add in, hey, marginalized people might experience X or Y. And no. It requires some real thoughtful work, some real thoughtful deprogramming, some real thoughtful unlearning for how we have functioned as an industry, how our industry has negatively impacted and or harmed others in conjunction with things like planning and design, and how we can undo that, being more thoughtful and intentional stewards going forward. And so for our work, that looks like being considerate of not just inclusive placemaking, but inclusive placekeeping. There are residents who have thoughts and feelings and experiences, and those can't be just overshadowed by innovation or ideas. I tell people all the time that if your innovation isn't accessible to everyone, it's not that innovative. If you can't create something that's common, it's probably not that excellent, because only a handful of people are going to have access to it. And so I think when we think through commercial real estate, where can we take this work moving forward? We have to really be cognizant of the way that real estate as a whole has disenfranchised communities by thinking critically about who was stewarding that work, what they did, why they did it, and how you may be able to do something different to be more inclusive and foster that sense of belonging in the future.
Excellent comments from each of you. And it was really two common themes that were woven in all your responses. One being, although this is a relationship-driven business, sometimes those relationships that we have can, as a byproduct to that negatively, we can be excluding other members from kind of joining into some of those discussions and some having that participation. Then the second one was really reaching that next generation, right? Increasing that pipeline, contacting, engaging with schools at that next level so we can start to get more diverse representation. So my next series of questions are going to be a little bit poignant, and I'll direct them accordingly. So we know that obviously the vaccination rate has been something that has been challenged a lot within our community. It's been a hot topic of our discussion. And I know Northwell had mentioned that it had achieved a 100% vaccination rate for its employees, and particularly people of color and women of childbearing age. That's been a little bit of an issue, a hot topic. So Maxine, can you just speak briefly on how Northwell has been able to navigate that space?
Yeah, and I think, what we were seeing within our walls was representative of what we were all seeing and reading about, certainly during that time since the vaccine first became available in December. So one of our team members, one of our nursing leaders, Sandra Lindsay, was actually the first person in the United States to receive the vaccine. She is a woman of Caribbean descent, born in Jamaica, lived in this country, and it represented so much. At the same time, some of us had access to and insight into what we were seeing on social media. So it was this tale of two worlds. One, she's being applauded by the president and all these other folks, and then she's being trolled and paroled and slammed on social media as a guinea pig. And that was reflective of what we know of history, what we know of experimentation in certain communities, and the hesitancy, right, that we were seeing. And so very quickly, as expected, we knew the challenge we were facing, and we started seeing it within our own workforce. And so you saw the early adopters, rushing to the vaccine, wanting to know when they were getting it, why was it taking so long? Obviously, we had to wait for availability. And then you saw the more hesitant folks. And so one was education. We listened, we surveyed, we did listening tours, we did focus groups, and team members told us very quickly, don't put images of us out there. That's cheap. That's not really going to resonate in the longer term. Educate, explain to me the efficacy, explain the science behind this. How is it developed? Is it safe? Focus on that. And so we started doing a ton of Q&A sessions, education sessions locally within our sites, within our medical school, within our corporate university, any and everywhere we could do it. We were doing it out there virtually and in person, leaning into our clinicians, particularly clinicians of color, African-American, Latino, Asian, et cetera, allowing them and asking them to go out and educate with that sensibility, right, that they have. So education we knew was going to be key. The imagery was important as well, but the education we found to be the most effective. And over time, just one-on-one conversations as well. So we equipped leaders, team members, our business employee resource groups, did a ton of sessions we sponsored around human experimentation, around hesitancy, answering questions, particularly Black and Brown communities where we saw it, within the community and within the workforce. We enabled leaders to have one-on-one conversations, to lean into the fear, right? Not to shun it, not to judge it, but to lean into it and answer questions people had and join them along their journey toward acceptance. We highlighted the stats showing the impact of COVID in our communities and what was happening, and that the vaccine, this wasn't the Tuskegee experiment, this was something different, right? Because that was the quick go-to default correlation, if you will. So I think, from December all the way through to now, it's definitely been a journey getting there. And then, yes, eventually there was a mandate in New York State. Interestingly, we saw a turnaround. And so the folks who left the organization, where the numbers sat, ultimately, the highest hesitancy didn't end up being in the communities where it was initially. And that was just fascinating, showing that the efforts did pay off. We listened, we heard, and then we moved in that direction. Our organization, we are 72% female, over 50% Gen Y, Gen Z, childbearing. So that was another population where there was hesitancy and fear. How is this going to impact fertility? Is this going to harm my baby and me? Education was then the answer. So we did a ton focused on pregnancy and fertility and found that to be helpful. So not an easy path at all. And everything we saw out there, we were seeing within our walls, even among clinicians. And I always use my mom as an example. She's a clinician. I got vaccinated in February, overcoming my own hesitancy. My mom got vaccinated, I would say August. And it just goes to show you that even some people closest to the science, regardless of education level, Yale educated, Columbia, all of these things that she brings to the table, didn't matter at the end of the day. History was there. And it was just through dialogue and not judging her, not forcing, but conversations found to be the most helpful. And she got there. Don't tell my mom, if any of you know her, that I shared that story.
Thank you so much, Maxine.
Yeah, thanks.
So my next question, again, I want to kind of put this out for the panel, and Vince, I'll start with you. But as part of shaping communities today, and involves developing and building structures that give back to the environment instead of taking away from it. So how can we in the commercial real estate industry make that more so, less a goal, but actually a reality?
Well, I think part of it is just the designs are made. And, I think of it from a lending perspective, like you have Fannie and Freddie in the agency business, where they're incentivizing borrowers and owners to go green, whether it's putting solar panels in, whether it's changing the type of water consumption items that they're using, and just anything that they can do from an environmental perspective to help reduce the cost and make it more friendly to the environment where they're putting that incentive out there. So sometimes it's got to be a numbers game. I think also the more and more that people are also looking at developments of trying to keep green space there as well. So just trying to be creative, whether it's when you're developing some of these projects that are in cities, whether they're also putting on some of the roofs or just the way they're laying it out, where they're actually building in actually green space, even though you're in a city, where they're putting plantings and stuff. It may add a little more weight to it, but again, it's helping to create and improve what's going on in the environment. I think the biggest piece of it is, one is financial incentive, like anything else with owners or developers and so forth. You got to look at the numbers. How do you make it work? And then also just some of the legislative things. Sometimes you don't want to overdo it, but you want to encourage it and try to be creative around it. And then I think just from the perspective, more and more people realize that it does make a difference. And then we look at the situation right now with oil prices and other things, just the cost of utilities are just going up. I was in a meeting yesterday with a couple of clients, and they're just like, they're here in the city. And they're like, look, we're on most of our buildings that we can do it. We're trying to put solar in. So at least reducing our electrical charges so that we can generate enough solar energy to at least all the common areas. It can help eliminate the cost there, which ultimately, hopefully, some of that will pass on to the tenants. But again, thinking those types of things in ways, because we went from gas was so cheap and abundant 2 years ago, 3 years ago, to now the price is tripled, quadrupled, and that's going to impact not just the owners, but also the tenants, which makes things harder. So even using gas versus oil, hey, that's great from an energy perspective, but from a cost perspective, if I had solar, that's even better if I can figure out ways to do that. And then battery technology that hopefully ultimately you can utilize solar, store it in the batteries, that then it can also produce heat. So right now you got to use the gas to run most of your boilers. So the more and more ways to try to be creative to figure out how to reduce those costs ahead of time, being proactive about it, are going to make a difference, because with all the ups and downs, it's a tremendous impact to not just the landlords and owners, but ultimately to the tenants.
Thank you. And Lisa, I asked you the same question.
Yeah, I mean, I think Vince hit a lot of it. I think it's almost a matter of, we were talking a little bit earlier about building the business case, and I think that's a little bit where the sustainable side of our work is. It's, everybody thinks it's a good idea. It's really cost effective. Our lenders, aren't always underwriting the savings because the technologies are new. I think we'll be having a very different conversation about this 5 years from now, because I think the industry, or that piece of the industry, will have matured some, and hopefully, as costs, as sustainable items become sort of more standard and less bespoke, costs will come down, and it'll be a little bit more widely adopted. I think right now, it's sort of a little bit, it's bad, because I think that, in addition to sort of it being somewhat new technology, we're caught up in supply chain issues that, are sort of impacting every piece of construction right now. So, I think we do some of it. We aspire to do more. We have a new person starting in January who's going to really try to focus some of the work that we're doing, because we're doing it a little bit on the property management side, on the construction side, on the development side, on the rebate and incentive side. So we're actually going to try to give a little bit more focus to that work starting in 22.
Thank you, Lisa. And Morgan, please.
We're probably a little bit of a special case. Sustainability and regeneration are the cornerstones to our district building. Every building is required to do a level of regeneration and sustainability work. We have about 9 to 10 acres of green space on this site, to include 2 new parks. But we are also striving for Living Building Challenge. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, Jason McLennan is the founder of the Living Building Challenge. It exceeds LEED and WELL. And so all of our buildings are working to be Living Building Challenge compliant. And we are also working to build the greenest building in the world. So regeneration is a huge deal for us. I mean, sustainability, is critical, in addition to the fact that there are funders that will fund it. I mean, for us, what we found is that you have to get creative with the capital stack to push sustainability forward. Some of it is obviously city funding and county and state funding, for they want to see sustainability. But outside of potential future public money, there's also investors, venture investors, including philanthropy, who also want to see sustainable outcomes and want to see cities move more towards being more green. And so our ability to kind of envision and make it the biggest and boldest green, and then working with our partners to say, hey, you want to see it, we want to see it, the Southside community deserves it, help us bring it to fruition. And fortunately, we've had a number of partners say, yeah, that is a part of our mission. We'll help you bring this to life. Sustainability is a little bit more expensive, but it is also something that we are innovating in every day. There are hemp companies that are making things a little bit cheaper. I mean, there's all kinds of things on the supplier and the material side that are coming out. And so as we engage those innovations, and also we have Sidewalk Labs on board who's helping us manage the district-wide costs around these things. We're looking to be fully electric. We're pretty committed to not just being carbon neutral, but carbon positive.
Excellent, thank you. And Maxine.
Yeah, sure. Definitely the intersection there again with health and health outcomes. And so has been a focus for us for a while, looking at emissions, the buildings we build, all of it. I think one area I'd love to focus on is the employee voice. We have a business employee resource group that's been around for a while called Greenberg. And it is focused on climate and focused on environmental health, if you will. And so through their advocacy, we even have green ambulances out there, which is insane and funded by some of our trustees. And so we're looking to grow that so that eventually all of our ambulances out there are green. And then a lot of what's already been discussed, I won't belabor, but certainly a commitment.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more question. And again, I would love to go around the horn, so please try to be concise in your responses because we want to get everybody. Obviously, just like Turner, our companies are successful because of the people that we work with. But COVID has had such an impact on our workforce. So what have your team members done to really support and advance your people throughout this pandemic, and any lessons learned that you've gained from going through that experience? And I'll start with you, Lisa, please.
Wow, that's a hard one to make short. So I think, I don't know that we have any particular magic answers. For us, it was communication. Like everybody else, we entered into a time that was really difficult. So we tried to keep in touch with our people. We tried to keep in close touch with our residents. We made more than 250,000 wellness calls to people who live in our buildings with PPE, meal delivery. We saw like a real big uptick in use of our EAP, our Employee Assistance Program, in terms of people just feeling stressed and needing to connect with resources. So we were really glad we had that. And just our HR team was just so phenomenal, fielding all kinds of calls. But I don't know that we had any particular magic answers than just to reach out and make sure everyone felt supported and heard.
Thank you, Lisa. Morgan, please.
We're a pretty employee-centric company. So if something came up and you needed to move, you could just move. And so we had a couple of employees move to other states and it was fine and they work remote. We did a lot of, this is probably going to sound pretty Pollyanna, but we did a lot of like group yoga and gong baths as a team. So we spend a lot of time on health and wellness in our regular routine as a company, but we did spend a lot of time just creating space for everyone to kind of adapt to whatever their new normal was, and holding space for that new normal without being too rigid about how they had to show up to work, how they had to engage on calls. If you need a mental health day, obviously you take it. If you need a couple of minutes, you can communicate those boundaries with everyone, and we're pretty open to that. So I think for most people on our team, we were able to retain everyone largely because we all were a family and just saw ourselves in that way.
Thank you so much. And Vince, please.
I think it's a lot of what folks said, but I just think it was the communication, just trying to be proactive and communicating with folks, just trying to be there, making the employee assistance programs available to folks to be able to deal with, and just Zoom was I transitioned jobs during the whole pandemic, but Zoom in one sense was something that I think allowed folks to connect, to not be as isolated, because a lot of people were isolated. So at times being able to see the folks that you've been working with or worked with and used to seeing every day, you get to see them on Zoom sometimes. So sometimes it was just a matter of having group calls, just to get the whole team together, just to be able to see one another and just to connect that way, outside of with just the intentional purpose of connecting folks. So I think that was one of the things that was beneficial and just help folks out. But being understanding, and because given that we're still in the pandemic, trying to be proactive and understanding everybody, looking at each person individually, because each person has a different situation they're going through, whether it's childcare, whether it's elderly parent or someone else that may be going through something. So.
Thank you, Vince. And Maxine, please.
Yeah, echoing a lot of what's been said, huge focus on childcare, anything we could do to unencumber folks to be able to come to work. We did send about 10,000 plus folks remote at the beginning of the pandemic, to save PPE, safety reasons, et cetera. And so technology became a huge focus of getting people set up. We had just gone on to Teams, I kid you not, like a week before. So that was perfect timing. We all just had to learn how to use it. I think many of us were putting it off and we had no choice at that point. And a couple of things where we're focused on today. Well-being is the business we're in. And so we continue to support folks. We lost about 24 team members through the pandemic, supporting their families financially and in other ways we continue to do. Flexibility continues. We have hybrid, we have remote. A lot of what we were talking about doing before got accelerated. We have, and you guys would appreciate this, we've stood up what we call work well spaces. It's sort of like our own version of WeWork. Very cool spaces where team members can register and get out of home and go and work and connect with each other and collaborate. So that's been cool. I think one issue with stigma is stigma. And so we continue while utilization is up, and we've created a Center for Traumatic Stress and Resiliency to kind of sustain our team members long-term. Utilization is up, but we still see a lot of stigma that we're trying to overcome through storytelling, connection, et cetera. So just a couple of areas of focus for us as we continue.
Thank you so much. And thank you really to each of you panel members for your very thoughtful and engaging and insightful conversation. You really gave us a lot of key takeaways from this discussion, and we truly, truly appreciate your involvement. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fuquan, and thank you to all of our panelists. I completely second everything you said, Fuquan. That was a fantastic discussion. And Maxine, don't worry, we won't tell your mom what you said. Now we're on to our final panel of the day, but by no means least in terms of ranking. They're all fantastic conversations. This panel's title is Getting the Financial Foot in the Door, Independence of Minority Ownership. Your moderator is Rebecca Goodman-Stevens, Chief Operating Officer at Burden LLP. Rebecca is joined by TJ Edwards, Managing Director at Walker Dunlop, Don Peoples, Chairman and CEO of the Peoples Corporation, and James Simon III, CEO and Managing Partner at Aslan Capital Partners. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I'd like to really thank everyone else on the prior panels. And that's one of the major benefits of being the third panel of the day, because it's really full of inspiration and energy from the prior panels. So thank you so much. I'm personally really excited about this forum in general and about this panel specifically, as at Burden, we have really put front and center diversity, equity, inclusion as part of our business strategy. And to quote Tammy Jones from earlier, it's not just as a fleeting commitment, but really as a true business imperative. And quite frankly, our responsibility to ensure that we have the most diverse teams looking at these complex issues that we handle and making the best decisions. So really passionate about the topic and excited to have our panelists here today. So I thought we could briefly go around the room and maybe each of you present yourselves briefly and tell us why this topic, specifically around minority ownership, is so important to you. And then we'll get into some deeper questions. So maybe start with Don, if we go alphabetically.
Great. Rebecca, good to be here. Of course, good to be here with TJ and my good friend Jim. I run a national real estate development company. We're in our 36th year in the development business and 40 years in the real estate industry. We currently operate along the East Coast and the West Coast. We are embarking with a partner of ours to build the tallest building in the Western United States on our site called Angels Landing on Bunker Hill in downtown LA. And we are now competing to do some exciting things in New York. I mean, diversity is important because everybody deserves a fair chance. And of course, for all of us to get the best out of what we do, diversity is our strength. We are better with a diverse team. Projects are better, companies are better when all people are included. The real estate industry has been the slowest to change because of institutionalized barriers for women and minorities. And I operate my company with the simple perspective that the economic benefits generated by our business ought to be going to people reflective of the population demographics of where we build. So I don't believe that the model that is currently in place in New York City is sustainable because you have a concentrated amount of wealth and you have concentrated opportunities within the real estate business, and capital flows to a very small group of people. And so I'm hopeful that during this time, we can all work together to knock down the barriers that women and people of color confront every day when trying to grow their businesses within our industry.
Thanks so much, Don. Jim, do you want to give us a few words on why this is important to you?
Sure. My name is Jim Simmons. I'm the CEO of Aslan Capital Partners. We've been in existence, if you take Don's experience, you divide it by 10. We've been in existence for 3 years. We are fund managers. We are owners operators as well. We specialize in value add, multifamily and mixed use assets by and large. We also have an opportunity zone practice. And I've been in the business for the better part of 25 years. And I think that Don hit it on the head when he said that there is there's a disconnect between opportunity and individuals who have been heretofore bereft of access to those opportunities. And hopefully through discussions like this, we can identify what those barriers are and try to come up with solutions to surmount them. And as I look at Don's career and others like him, some of the barriers that they encountered 30 years ago still exist today, and in some instances are higher than they were, as we may not like to believe or admit, but that's the case, unfortunately. So we'll talk about that as we go forward.
Thanks, Jim. TJ.
Thank you, Rebecca, and I am excited to be talking with everyone today. So I'm a managing director over at Walker & Dunlop. I lead our client services team. And in Walker & Dunlop, last year we were the number one provider of capital in the multifamily space and number 4 in overall CRE in terms of providing capital for our industry. So prior to me joining Walker & Dunlop, I was over at Freddie Mac. That's where I started my career. And Freddie is, over the past few years, has been the number one provider of multifamily capital in the GSE space. And during my tenure there, I was able to do a lot of great lending, building relationships, but no one across the table looked like me, and I figured, hey, look, we are the number one provider of capital in the multifamily space, and no one looks like me across the table. There clearly is a disconnect, right? And there is an opportunity, across the entire spectrum of our industry to drive sustainable change. And one of the things that I think is different with this movement is there are multiple generations demanding that we have change. And if the train has left the station, and if we want to, have a huge impact, we have to collectively come together, which is one of the things that we've created at Walker & Dunlop, which is CR United, which is an alliance that brings a bunch of heavyweights in the industry together so we can make sustainable change.
Thanks, TJ. And I think that's a great point in terms of just the current context and how things are shifting. I know that as a panel, we decided to really focus more on the solutions, but maybe we could just briefly hear from you guys in terms of what you see as the current barriers to entry in terms of ownership in a really capital intensive environment, and how you've seen that maybe shift over the past year or so. So who wants to take that first?
I'd love to take it.
Don, go for it.
Look, it's simple. There is $69 trillion, now $69 trillion currently invested in private equity and venture capital. Biden is trying to save the nation with $1 to $3 trillion. So $69 trillion is invested in that sector. Of that, less than 1.3% of that $69 trillion is invested in firms run or owned by women or people of color combined. So what you have is 98.7% of the $69 trillion invested in the private equity space that is necessary for us to invest in our properties goes to white men. Now, I take nothing away from, everybody works very hard, but that is not reflective of the population demographic. So either you come to the conclusion, one of two conclusions: women and minorities are innately inferior, which I do not subscribe to, or there is systemic discrimination when it comes to deploying capital to women and people of color. I believe that is the case. And until we change that, until we require the investors and the asset managers to make structural changes, we will not make progress. And the irony of this is that the biggest single class of investor in private equity are public employee pension systems. Those public employee pension systems are disproportionately comprised of women and people of color. And so people of color and women cannot even get fair access to their own money. And then it's an absurdity that's been allowed to go on for such a long period of time. And it's time we hold these controllers, like, the state of New York, the state of California, the city of New York, we got to hold them accountable for these terribly discriminatory investment decisions that they're making.
Thanks, Don. James or TJ, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, as Don said, I'm an engineer by training, so numbers matter, and I can't speak to causes, but I can speak to effects, right? And the effects are that it is much more difficult for minority managers and women managers to attract capital. And the process to do so seems to be much more difficult for us to navigate. And we're not talking about, we're not talking about people who haven't done this for the better part of their careers. We're talking about people who have invested capital successfully over the course of 15, 20, 30 years, whose track records you could put up against any of the best investors in its assets class, in its comparative set. So I think you need to really look at outcomes and be transparent and say, okay, here are the subset of managers that we have allocated capital to. Here are the managers that we saw that we didn't. Why did we choose manager X over manager Y? What are the objective criteria that manager X is chosen over manager Y? And it can't be that, or at least I refuse to believe, that all of the manager X's were superior to all the manager Y's in every respect. So those types of conversations have to be held before we can have a critical discussion about how to rectify the situation.
And just to add on to that, we always talk about access to capital issues, but I'm a full subscriber that in order to solve that, we've got to solve the relationship challenges that exist in our industry. And yes, there's blatant racism. Yes, there are systemic issues, but there's also unconscious bias. And I think we have to solve or find solutions for all three if we're really talking about making sustainable, impactful change for both women and minorities.
I love that you brought that up, TJ, because Lisa Gomez earlier was just saying that a lot of, the industry, it's not just about the capital, it's about access, connections, and relationships. And I wanted to actually ask you guys that question on how we can think about this differently. Sorry, Don, I cut you off. You're going to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been doing this 40 years. I'm not going to try to change people. It hasn't worked. The reality is, look, the political discord of where we are today shows us that our society hasn't changed. Women are confronted with greater challenges and outward discrimination today versus 30 years ago. So we don't have time to change everybody's perspective. We just need to demand fairness. We're in a democracy, so capitalism and capital should be deployed in a democratic way as well. And Jim makes a point about competence. Of course, think about the people who I see get allocated capital in our development business. Let's just think about what's going on in the marketplace today and how, as Warren Buffett said, you don't know who's swimming naked until the tide goes out. So let's look at where we are and look at how many people got money that probably should never have gotten money, and look at their career trajectories and look at other people who've been successful in this industry. They start off, as all kinds of places. So I think that we're at a place now. Look, New York State and New York City pension systems actually have a policy: no new funds. Okay, so there are not many women-run and managed PE funds in real estate, and there are not many Black PE funds managing real estate. So no new funds. Hey, New York City and New York State, we care, and we care about you all, and we care about fairness, but sorry, we can't let you all get started because we can't invest with you. So we're going to keep the status quo and go with the big firms. That's an absurd barrier. And these people are elected, and the public needs to wake up and understand what types of decisions that people are making and they're empowered to make. I would argue that more important than the governor of New York for people in real estate, it would be the comptroller of New York. I'd argue that before the mayor, it would be for people trying to break in, it would be the comptroller of the city of New York. So I think we've got to say, you know what, enough is enough, that the numbers are crystal clear. We don't need any studies. We don't need any more discussion. We know that there are more than 1.3% of the total groups of businesses and entrepreneurs and executives in private equity and venture capital. There are more than 1.3% women and minorities competent to excel in that space. Women are a majority of our nation's population. They're 53% of New York City's population. People of color are 70% of New York City's population and over 50% of the state of New York. How absurd is it that they can't do better than this? And I think that the reality is that this model that we have right now of capitalism is under siege. Look who's getting elected. Even in Buffalo, the Democratic nominee for mayor is a Democratic socialist because people have had enough. They see this system as unfair as it is, and they are not going to take it. So unless our industry is a part of making that change happen, and that white men speak out about the unfair system that women are confronting and that people of color are confronting, then they're going to take the risk of their entire capitalistic system when it comes to real estate being dismantled by the public sector.
Let's talk about that. And I think there's a question actually in the chat, and I think we're going to wait for the end, but I want to mention it now about what you guys are actually doing to drive that change proactively. James, there's a question in the chat about deal that you made with Harvard that was really groundbreaking in terms of giving access to Black and Latino investors. And I also wanted to give TJ a point to mention CR United and some of the emerging manager initiatives also. So maybe we start with James and then go into that with TJ.
Yeah, so the Harvard deal really highlighted two issues. The first of which is access to opportunities to participate in a major way in large-scale developments that are controlled either by institutions, governments, municipalities, and the like, right? So many of the ways that those types of opportunities are conveyed is either through some form of RFP or some process. The qualifications for said RFPs, particularly when you're talking about large scale, are generally at a level where very few minority and women-led firms can be primary because they're asking for experience doing projects of similar size and are also asking for balance sheets which are large enough to bring to bear towards the completion of the project. That has some historical resonance to it because the reason why there are very few firms of that size and order of magnitude is because they were never given the opportunity to grow over time. And as you look historically back 20, 30, 40 years ago, where one had started a firm then and won enough business to grow, then you look forward 20 or 30 years and you will have a firm that has a book of experience as well as a balance sheet to be able to compete for projects of that order of magnitude. And because of minorities and women being blocked from those opportunities 20, 30, 40 years ago, they haven't grown to the point where they can be a primary or a lead, by and large, in a project of that size. So that's problem number one. And how can we change that and make that better over the next 20 or 30 years is a problem that we all need to work towards. Problem number two is when these types of projects come to fore, the individuals who can invest in those projects, who have the ability to say, hey, I would like to invest my $50,000, $100,000, $1 million in a project of that size, order of magnitude, institutional quality, just doesn't exist because those investment opportunities are based purely on relationships. And if you do not have a relationship with a developer, if you don't have a relationship with institutional investors, then you're quite frankly just never going to see that deal. You're never going to have access to it. So the Harvard deal was a way of changing that specific dynamic and allowing people of color to invest directly in that transaction alongside institutional investors on the same terms as institutional investors. And that previously or rarely had been done. Previously had not or rarely had been done. So what we're trying to do was to create a framework that could be replicated across many institutions to say, listen, if you're doing a big project and you're bringing in outside capital to do that, provide the opportunity for people of color to invest alongside your institutional investors, your private investors, your friends and family investors, so that they can generate multi-generational wealth, which is why people invest in assets like that. So that's our way of trying to change one part of the ecosystem, which is who's investing in what, who has access to transactions, who is controlling access to those types of large scale, very well capitalized institutional real estate deals.
Thank you, James. TJ, do you want to maybe explain a little bit about what you're doing at Walker Dunlop and how you've been looking at some of these transactions differently with a different lens?
Yeah, sure. So here at Walker & Dunlop, we created our CRE United, which is our initiative to drive business opportunities for women and minorities in commercial real estate. And it honestly was a direct response to what happened to George Floyd last year, right? A lot of corporations were making very public statements, announcements, making commitments to change internally around their business practices. But after speaking to a lot of my friends in the industry that look like me, haven't really seen the impact of it, right? So how do we do less talking, more action? And CRE United is all about action, and it's about the positive returns that we get as corporations when we invest in diversity. And what we have identified as a couple of areas of opportunities is one with access to capital, and it goes so far beyond just LP capital. On the GP side, a lot of minority firms have access to tie-up deals because they don't have that GP capital. On the lending side, you need a certain financial wherewithal, net worth and liquidity to qualify for certain loans. A lot of sponsors don't qualify with the financial wherewithal requirements. And then also with back office support, so if you get access to deals, you get access to capital. How are you set up from a financial, legal, or accounting standpoint? And what we identified is that a lot of these firms don't have that back office support that would get some of the larger LPs comfortable with giving them capital. So to James's point, I mean, it's an ecosystem, right? There's several layers and it's very complex. And we're just trying to chip away with it one deal at a time. And we've seen some deal flow coming through CRE United with our partners, which consist of Freddie, Fannie, Kane Anderson, Pacific Life, and others, where we are trying to figure out how we can use our platforms to create impactful change.
Thanks, TJ. The audience is reacting in the chat and saying, time to stop talking the talk and walk the walk. So let's talk about action. And you guys, obviously a lot of entrepreneurial businesses in our industry, and in your positions of what you do, there's a lot of space to have an impact. What are you guys doing with your ecosystems of partners that Morgan Malone mentioned earlier? Like, what are you doing and how are you holding yourselves accountable to driving this change at your level? Who wants to start with that, Don?
Yeah, look, I agree with the person who said it's time to act. So our company, just to give you a perspective, our company, ownership is power. I mean, we need to have more diverse owners. It's simple as that. I make a decision, I run my company, I make the total decision on it. It's my money, it's my company, and I make these decisions. So as a company overall, since we've been in business, we've done over 25% of all of our contracts with minority and women-owned firms. We stepped it up to 35%. So for example, we have a pipeline of over $5 billion of development projects. So that's $1.75 billion, almost $2 billion in contracting opportunities for women and minority owned businesses. Where our pipeline is likely to grow this year to about $10 billion, $5 billion more. That would put us in a position to provide over $3.5 billion. We have exceeded every goal in this decade that we have set for economic inclusion, and we have done, and we ended 2010 beating our estimates as well. So our goal is to provide economic opportunities there. We also are raising an emerging developer fund because I am very frustrated by the calls that I get from talented women and talented African Americans and Latino entrepreneurs who have good deals, but they can't find capital for it. And of course, this is a capital intensive business. We deploy most of our capital into our own projects. So we are out raising an institutional fund, a small fund, $500 million for investing in emerging developers. And what's astonishing is that these allocations that have gone to emerging, they changed it from women and minority owned to emerging, because white men weren't satisfied with 98.7%. So now the emerging developer funds, if you look at the ones that have gotten the institutions and the asset managers that have allocations, aside from Tammy's firm, if you look at their allocations and where their money goes, emerging developers, so they're first, second, third time non-minority, non-women developers. So I mean, we're building a fund that will actually do what it was intended to do. Now, it's hard for Jim to speak out about this, and it's hard for TJ to speak out about this. It's hard for Tammy to. So I'm doing it, because the reality is, because it's my company, if the fund is not going to move the needle for my business. I mean, we're building multi-billion-dollar development projects, and that's where we make our money. So I'm willing to be an outspoken critic of a system that is absurdly unfair. And it is time to take action and not continue to talk about it.
Thanks, Don, and thanks for being so, genuine. And I think it is about having these real and honest and, even if it is an uncomfortable discussion, I think that's what really drives change. So TJ, you were going to say something, I think.
Yeah, just to add on to that, we have to find a way that we can define what success is as it relates to giving access of capital and opportunities to minorities, and have clear metrics. And right now there are some challenges with identifying that. The agencies for Freddie and Fannie try to implement programs where they can identify the diverse nature of their borrowers. That was shot down by the regulator, right? Because there were some concerns around fair housing lending. So if you have two of the biggest providers of multifamily capital in our country, having issues and challenges trying to figure out the diversity of their own sponsors, that's creates roadblocks and hurdles, right? So we have to figure out how we can measure, so we can manage to it and define what success is.
Thanks, TJ. Jim, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm going to tackle two related areas that I think are important. The first of which is pipeline. And through my role as vice chair of the Real Estate Executive Council, we identified the fact that by the time one gets to college, it is late to start contemplating, or at least to become aware of, careers in real estate. So we have the REX program where we expose about 150 high school kids a year to real estate, such that when they get to college, they can be aware of it and say, that's something that I at least have an interest in or want to pursue or think about getting a summer internship. So we have to have a wider funnel and more people coming into the business at the early stages. I think secondarily, at the later stages, driving change within organizations really starts at the CEO and board level within the C-suite. And so also taking a look at organizations at the top and saying, if we can get more people on the boards, and this includes both publicly and privately traded enterprises, who have in their mind's eye, how are we doing D&I within the context of this particular firm? Our staff, how we contract, who we partner with, who we invest in, that those conversations at a senior level can drive down an organization and you can see change. So those are two of the things that I've personally been engaged in, which I hopefully over the next 5 to 10 years we'll see the fruits of, as more people come into the industry at a lower level and more people get opportunities at a senior level to drive change.
Thanks, Jim, for that. And I think it really goes to the prior point that was brought up about deprogramming and unlearning how we look at things. How are you guys really ensuring that you have the most diverse teams at your tables to be making these decisions? Do you mind sharing some very concrete KPIs? Like, how are you looking at at that this year, how you're holding yourselves accountable in terms of ensuring that you do attract and retain the best talent, and what measurements you're using even for vendor and investor, networks of who you're working with. Maybe TJ, start with this one.
Yeah, sure. So by Walker & Dunlop being on the services side, one thing that we are seeing, and that which is driving change, is that the investor side is demanding it, right? So when we are showing up to pitches, both on the investment sale, on debt and equity, showing up to these rooms with, a bunch of white males, is no longer going to cut it, right? It has to be women. There has to be people of color, showing up to these meetings. And I think it's a great thing that, the investor side is driving, saying, hey, look, if you want our business, you got to show representation of diversity. Another thing is accountability is huge, right? And to James's point, at the executive level, there has to be accountability within these organizations. And one of the things that we have going on at Walker & Dunlop is tying diversity metrics to executive compensation. So we have our Drive to 25 goals, and a big portion of that contains diversity. And that not only includes, bringing in diverse talent, from the college level, but what does the mid-level manager level look like? What does the senior level executive level look like in terms of diversity for both women and minorities? And it is tied directly to executive compensation and part of our Drive to 25 goals.
Thanks, TJ. Don, Jim, do you want to add to that?
Look, I'll tell you that real estate development, again, that's what I speak mainly to, is a low barrier to entry business. Don't need an MBA to get in it. You don't need a college education. I'm living proof of it. I was going to be a doctor, and I was in an accelerated medical program. I quit after my first year. I went back to my hometown of Washington, D.C. at 19, got a real estate sales agent license, then a broker's license, and became an appraiser. Got some support by the then mayor, African-American mayor, and started an appraisal business when I was at 23 years old. And by 26, I was building my first commercial office building. And that was because I was in an environment of opportunity where economic inclusion mattered. And the mayor and the government there set a tone for it. And so real estate development has always been an entrepreneurial business. And if you look at the players in New York City and look at their backgrounds, very, very, very few came through any kind of structural process. It's an entrepreneurial thing. What they had in common is willing to work hard, be able to think out of the box, and most importantly, have access to capital. And I mean, you've got people who started off as taxi cab dispatchers, mini storage owners, becoming major real estate developers. And so you got to ask yourself, in this great land of opportunity, how come we can't see a little diversity here since we have these low barriers to entry here, right? And that's because we got to create an expectation, as TJ was talking about, in the corporate world, yes, but also on the other side. And by the way, we don't need people to be perfect. We don't need, actually, minorities and women should have an equal right to fail too. I mean, as many other developers do. But people need to be given a chance. I mean, developers start off somewhere. Real estate investors start off somewhere. So they need to be given a chance early in their careers, and they need to be supported just like everybody else. I operate from a very simple perspective. We don't need to mentor anybody. We don't need to nurture. There's enough talent out here. We just need the playing field to be level and fair, and the doors to be open to everybody, and the glass ceiling to be cracked so that women can rise up. And so a fair system will create unparalleled opportunities. I mean, you look at Jim's firm. I mean, Jim, while his firm has been in business for 3 years or so, he is a veteran of this space, managing billions of dollars of capital. So capital should be flowing his way. And because of the long, multi-decade track record. But the reality is that we are in an unfair system. So what we're doing is every time we can, we are doing business with women and minorities. Our land use lawyers are women. Our contractors are women. We have development partners now, women and minorities. And I'm going to continue to do things like this And every time I have a conversation with someone in the media, it's going to have this topic in the mix of that discussion.
And Don, you bring up a really good point, which is, true equality is the ability to either fail or be mediocre, right? Just be average. And we don't have that. We don't have that ability. I mean, we have to be the best at all times to even get the modicum of opportunity that we do get. But this reminds me of a story where I'm in a large pension fund's office in a pitch, and I got asked about another manager of color that they had some issue with that wasn't even in our asset class. I mean, we're in a total separate, wasn't even real estate, total separate asset class. I said, what relevance did that have to do with this discussion that we're having about my performance in real estate? So this guilt by association, if there's an issue with a person of color, that becomes somehow indicative of your performance or what you may end up doing. And I've never heard anyone ask Citi in a question about how Morgan Stanley performed or vice versa, right? So I think that our ability to get outside the box of managers of color or emerging managers, such that we are just managers, and we are all happy to compete on that same playing field. I don't want to be known as an emerging manager. I don't want to be known as a manager. I want to be known as the best manager possible in real estate or in the expertise in which I'm putting myself forward. Yeah, which, by the way, I believe I am.
And you are.
I think that the numbers will demonstrate that if you ask any of my investors.
The numbers will speak for themselves. I really like that point on failure. And I think in general, there's a lot of thought leadership just on how failure actually is. That's where a lot of great ideas and innovation actually come from, right? And if, that's not necessarily a bad thing in any way. And I think having everyone be able to learn from mistakes is huge. And it's not indicative of future performance, actually, on the contrary. So I think it's a great point. If you guys had a magic wand today, right? And from what I'm hearing from you guys, really, it's clear the system is not fair. It's set up to maintain a status quo, and really change is going to happen, right? That's really the message I'm hearing, the energy I'm hearing. Change is going to happen either way. So what can anyone do on this call? If you had a magic wand, what would you say, this is what I want everyone on this call to be able to do in the audience today? What would that be? I have to pick.
I'll start.
Jim.
I want to see a firm, a minority-owned firm, achieve the heights of one of the big five publicly traded alternative investment firms. Right? If you look at, we forget that those firms have not been around for 100 years. They've been around for 25, 30, 35 years. So not only in my lifetime, but in my working lifetime, right? And they are now enterprises that range from, call it 200 billion in AUM, all the way up to 400 in AUM. So, I don't know if Robert Smith will be the first one to get there, but I would like to see that. But in order for him to get there, he's going to have to be allowed to do things that the traditionals have done, which is diversify. So not just say, hey, you're really good at just this, so stick to just that, right? You should be able to do real estate, you should be able to do credit, you should be able to do venture, hedge, whatever it is it takes for you to walk into an investor and say, I have a full suite of investment products to offer to you. We should be able to do that because, again, proving that talent is not the arbiter, because I think you can point to returns of his versus anyone else's. Within real estate, you've got Tammy, you've got Daryl, you've got other players. I'd like to see the growth trajectory of any of these firms match any of those firms.
Great.
And if we can get to that point, then 10 or 20 years from now, we'll be having a conversation about, oh, there are 3 or 4 or 5 that have reached those heights.
Thanks, Jim. What about you, TJ and Don? Really, what if you had a magic wand, what would you do to have things next year? We have this conversation that it's just not the same conversation. What would that be?
Yeah, so I think Don threw out a statistic early on the amount of AUM controlled by women and minorities in our industry. I think it was like 1.5% or 1.3%. How do we move that needle, right? And how do we get that from that crazy low figure, to 10%, to 15%, right? And how can we accelerate it and get it done quickly? And one thing I want to just ensure doesn't happen is that we're talking about diversity today. I think this is the second time the CEO has had this panel discussion like this. That is not just a trend, right? This is a movement, and it's going to take the entire ecosystem of commercial real estate to drive this forward, right? So the same excitement, that we had around diversity last year, and the same excitement that we have now, that it continues, right? And this is truly a movement and not just a trend, because the reality is the news cycle had, social issues on constant cycle last year, right? It's not there anymore, right? So it's not in our forefront. Right. So how do we ensure that in our business practices and decisions that we're making, that we're also focusing on driving diversity?
My perspective, what I would like to see is something pretty straightforward and simple: fairness. The concept, and I hear this often, that investing in minority and women asset managers, investing in minority and women developers is too risky. And that for institutional investors, many institutional investors. Now that is a false premise, because there have been several studies recently and over the last 3 to 5 years. And these studies examine minority and women asset managers and compare their performance to non-minority firms. The minority firms outperform. And the rationale is because they get so few chances, and as Jim indicated, they have to be outliers. Minorities and women have to be outliers in terms of performance. They're less likely to fail. They're going to work harder because this is the one opportunity that they're going to get, and they understand that they will be stigmatized if they don't do well, and they'll hurt others, like Jim pointed out, as absurd as that is. And so what I'm hopeful is that, our industry and our society tends to look at women to a lesser degree than African Americans, but they look at us all as a philanthropic community outreach service, if you will. Or so if they invest in a woman-owned business or a minority-owned business, it's because they're good people. They're not the systemically structural, discriminatory environments that they really are. I think that what we should get to a place of is where the performance of economic inclusion improves return, improves performance, and that everybody gets a fair chance. And I don't think, and I'll just close on this, I don't think change is coming. I don't think change within the industry is coming. I think a dismantling of it is coming. The rent control regulations and the regulatory environment is going to be much more hostile because people are going to keep going left because they don't feel that the American dream or the New York dream is accessible to them. And so until that's restored, and that means restored to the majority of the population, then I think we're going to be in a lot more trouble than people understand.
Thanks, Don. I think that's a great way to wrap up today, and really loops back to the beginning around it's not philanthropic. It's not about lowering the bar. Quite on the contrary, it's a business imperative and about just having richer and more diverse perspectives on these complex issues. So Thank you so much. Thanks to all of the panelists. There are some tactical questions about how to get involved with some of these initiatives, and we can address that. I can follow up on those after the panel. I'm going to give it back to Kathy. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you, Rebecca, for leading that discussion there. Such a powerful panel. I think everybody watching today would agree with the great action items we can all take away and move forward with from that panel. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to all of our speakers for these honest conversations. I hope today's program ignites further dialogue around how business leaders can provide greater equity across industries, and also what the commercial real estate industry can do to develop more equitable communities and business opportunities. Before we conclude, I'd like to again thank Crew New York, today's association partner, as well as our program sponsors, Burden LLP, CRE United, Farpoint, JP Morgan Chase, Rosenberg and Estes, Turner, and Walker and Dunlop. As Commercial Observer's finance editor, I was also really pleased to hear the insight and remarks around investment and lending today. I hope you'll all mark your calendars and join me next week for our New York Fall Finance Forum, which is being held on October 26th at the Metropolitan Club. We also have our virtual DC Fall Finance Forum coming up on November 9th. And be sure to register for our Innovation Week, which will kick off on November 16th with our annual Building Tech Forum and close on November 18th with our Innovators Forum and Awards reception. Our call for award nominations is now open, so please do go to our website and submit any nominees that you have. Thank you again and have a great afternoon.